In the late 8th century, sails appeared on the horizon of the British Isles carrying men whose very name would strike fear for generations. The Vikings. Raiding turned to settlement, battle turned to kingdom, and over time, the Danes shaped the land as much as the land shaped them. This is the story of the Vikings in Britain, the Danelaw, great battles, and the lasting cultural legacy they left behind. The Viking Age in Britain is often said to begin in 793 CE, when Norse raiders attacked the holy island of Lindisfarne, off the Northumbrian coast. The shock of that raid echoed through the Christian world, but it was just the beginning. Expert historian, on camera. At first, these were hit-and-run attacks. The Vikings targeted monasteries and coastal settlements, rich in gold and poorly defended. Over the next decades, Viking raids grew bolder. By the mid-9th century, they began to winter in England, establishing fortified camps. Raiding evolved into conquering. Map animation showing the Great Heathen Army's movement, from East Anglia into Northumbria and Mercia. In 865 CE, a coalition of Viking forces known to history as the Great Heathen Army landed in East Anglia, led by legendary figures like Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba. Expert historian. This was no longer just about plunder. This was a coordinated campaign of conquest, aiming to carve out new Viking realms. The army marched north, capturing York in 866, a city that would become the heart of Viking power in England, known as Jórvík. Expert historian. York thrived under Viking rule. It became a major trading center, connecting the British Isles to the wider Viking world. Drone shots over modern Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, East Anglia overlay maps of the Danelaw. By the late 9th century, the Vikings controlled a vast region across northern and eastern England. This area, known as the Danelaw, had its own laws and customs rooted in Scandinavian tradition. Reenactment of King Alfred in the marshes. Scenes from the Battle of Edington. Yet the Vikings did not go unchallenged. In Wessex, King Alfred the Great became their most determined opponent. Expert historian. Alfred's resilience, especially after his surprise counterattack at the Battle of Edington in 878, was crucial. He forced the Viking leader Guthrum to accept baptism and sign the Treaty of Wedmore, establishing borders between Wessex and the Danelaw. Battle scenes, including Brunanburh and Stamford Bridge. The 10th century saw continued clashes. Alfred's successors, like Edward the Elder and Aethelstan, pushed back the Viking hold. In 937, Aethelstan's victory at the Battle of Brunanburh secured English dominance, though Norse kingdoms lingered in Northumbria and the Irish Sea. In 1013, Sweyn Forkbeard briefly conquered England. His son, Cnut the Great, would rule over a North Sea empire stretching from England to Denmark and Norway. Expert historian. By the mid-11th century, Viking power in England waned. The death of Harold Hardrada at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 marked the end of large-scale Norse invasions. Alfred's vision planted the seeds for a unified English kingdom, that would, in time, reclaim territory from the Danes. Expert historian. The Danelaw stretched roughly from the River Thames to the Tees, and west to Watling Street. Here, Old Norse blended with Old English, shaping language, place names, and even local governance. Thousands of settlers came, not just warriors, but farmers and traders. They founded new settlements, many still bearing names ending in by, Thorpe, and Toft, remnants of Viking language still visible on today's map. Though Viking rule faded, their cultural imprint endured. Old Norse words survive in everyday English. Sky, window, knife, husband. The legal traditions, art styles, and town planning left marks still visible. Expert historian. In places like York and Dublin, archaeological finds reveal thriving Viking Age towns, bustling with trade and cultural exchange. The story of the Vikings in Britain is more than raids and conquest. It's also about settlement, integration, and a shared history that still shapes Britain today. And so the Viking Age in Britain came to an end, but its echoes remain. The laws of the Danelaw influenced local governance for centuries. The trade routes they forged connected Britain to Scandinavia and beyond, bringing silk from Byzantium, silver from the east, and new ideas from across the seas. In the quiet corners of Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and the East Midlands, every by and thorpe still whispers of Norse settlers who built homes, raised families, and called this land their own. Archaeology continues to reveal the human side of the Viking story. Expert archaeologist, on site. At Coppergate in York, we've uncovered houses, workshops, and even discarded shoes from Viking settlers. These finds show us everyday life: leatherworkers, traders, and children playing in narrow alleyways. Burial mounds and grave goods tell us about belief and identity, blending pagan and Christian traditions as the Norse adapted to their new home. Expert archaeologist. In places like Repton and Heath Wood, we see burial practices that are distinctly Scandinavian: boat burials and cremation cemeteries. They remind us these settlers saw themselves as part of a wider Viking world. None of this history would have been possible without the Viking longship. Expert historian. Longships were technological marvels, shallow drafted for rivers, yet strong enough for the open sea. They let the Vikings raid, trade, and settle thousands of miles from home. Ships carried not just warriors and settlers, but language, art, and stories. Visual. Carven dragon prows, shield decorations. In the prow of every longship, you can see the spirit of exploration and the desire to shape a new world. Today, science adds a new chapter to the Viking story. Geneticist, on camera. Modern DNA studies show significant Scandinavian ancestry in regions that were once part of the Danelaw, especially in Yorkshire and the East Midlands. Yet being Viking wasn't just about blood. It was also a cultural choice. To live by Norse law, speak the language, and keep old traditions alive. Expert historian. Over time, identities blurred. Descendants of Viking settlers became English, but the influence endured. In the end, the Vikings were more than raiders. They were builders, traders, poets, and kings. Their ships brought terror, but also trade. Their swords carved kingdoms, but also new laws. And in language, landscape, and legend, the Vikings remain part of the living story of Britain. This was the age of the dragon ships, the Danelaw, and the forging of England itself. A time when the North came south and changed the Isles forever.